The church smelled faintly of lilies and dust. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows in fractured colors. But none of it could warm Eleanor Wilson. At 68, she had never felt so cold, so utterly alone, despite the packed pews behind her. Richard's coffin rested at the front, polished mahogany gleaming under spotlights, surrounded by arrangements of white lilies and roses that seemed obscenely vibrant against the somber backdrop. Eleanor sat rigid in the front pew, her hands trembling slightly in her lap as she stared straight ahead, refusing to crumble. The whispers of her children floated from the row behind her, cutting through the solemn organ music like shards of glass. "Finally, it's over," Jessica murmured, not bothering to lower her voice. "Now we can get on with our lives." Eleanor flinched but didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see the impatience in her daughter's eyes. Michael chuckled in response. Dad certainly took his time, didn't he? They were her children, her flesh and blood. Yet in that moment, they felt like strangers wearing familiar faces. Eleanor closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw Richard's face as he had been in his final days. Tired, pain etched into the lines around his mouth, but still managing that wry smile when he squeezed her hand. "Trust me," he had whispered 3 days before he died. "Everything will be all right." But nothing felt all right. 43 years of marriage, ended, a life built together, shattered, and their children. Eleanor pushed the thought away as the service ended and guests filed out, offering brief condolences that she barely registered. Thomas Reynolds, Richard's attorney and friend of 30 years, approached with a gentle nod. "The reading will take place in the side room. Eleanor, whenever you're ready." She nodded, gathering her strength to stand. The small room adjacent to the chapel already contained Jessica and Michael, perched on leather chairs, their postures tense with anticipation rather than grief. Jessica, at 41, was sleek and polished in designer black, her dark hair pulled into a severe knot. Michael, 38, checked his watch impatiently, his tailored suit emphasizing his athletic build. Reynolds cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses as Eleanor took her seat across from her children. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice formal but kind. Richard was explicit about his wishes, so this won't take long. He unfolded the papers before him and began to read in a measured tone. "I, Richard James Wilson, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament." Eleanor barely heard the legal preamble, her mind drifting to summer evenings on their porch. Richard's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She returned to the present when Reynolds' voice shifted. "To my beloved children, Jessica Ann Wilson and Michael Richard Wilson, I leave the sum of $12 million to be divided equally between them. Additionally, I bequeath to them the 2 vehicles purchased this year, the Lexus SUV to Jessica and the Audi sedan to Michael." Jessica gasped in delight. Michael exhaled a laugh of triumph. Their eyes gleamed with naked pleasure. "To my wife, Eleanor Margaret Wilson, my dearest companion of 43 years, Reynolds continued, his voice softening, "I leave this letter." He placed a sealed cream envelope in Eleanor's hands. The room went utterly still. Jessica stared, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together in confusion before a laugh burst from her lips. "A letter, that's it. That's all you get." Michael leaned back, a smirk playing at his lips. "Looks like Dad thought you'd had enough." "Mom?" Eleanor sat frozen, the envelope heavy in her lap. Her children's laughter echoed in the small room, sharp and merciless. She lowered her eyes to the envelope. Richard's familiar handwriting danced across it deliberate, steady strokes forming her name. He had chosen every word, every mark of that pen with intention. Her fingers traced the seal, and for the first time since his death, something stirred inside her, not despair or defeat, but something quieter, deeper, something that felt almost like hope. She slipped the letter into her purse without opening it. Whatever secret it held, she would uncover it alone, away from the mockery in her children's eyes. "Is that everything, Tom?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Reynolds nodded, sympathy in his gaze. "That concludes the reading." Eleanor rose, straightening her back. "Then I'll be going home." As she walked out, she heard Jessica already on her phone, voice bubbling with excitement about her windfall. Michael was asking Reynolds about when the funds would be accessible. Neither of them said goodbye. Eleanor waited until nightfall to open the envelope. Her children had left hours earlier, giddy with their sudden wealth, too busy calling banks and friends to spare her another word. The house felt cavernous without Richard's voice filling it, the silence broken only by the creak of old wood and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning, the same table where they'd shared breakfast for 43 years, where they'd helped the children with homework, where Richard had first told her about his diagnosis 18 months ago. Her hands shook as she carefully slit the envelope open. Inside was a single folded page of thick cream paper, covered in Richard's familiar, meticulous script. "My love, by now you will have endured the cruelty of our children's laughter. I did not intend it to be this way, but I needed to reveal their hearts before I revealed the truth. They think they have won, but what they hold is only a shadow. What is real? I have left to you." Eleanor pressed the page to her lips, her throat tightening. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. He had known. He had known how they would treat her. "You will find in this letter a small key. It belongs to a safe deposit box at the bank on Ashland Avenue. Everything I could not trust them with rests inside. You alone are meant to open it. Do not let anyone know. Do not let them take this from you. Trust yourself, as I have trusted you. With love always. Richard." A small metallic clink fell into her palm as she unfolded the paper further. A tiny brass key, its number etched faintly along the stem. She held it tight, afraid it might vanish if she loosened her grip. She sat for a long while staring at the key. Questions circled her mind. What could possibly be in that safe money documents? Something he didn't want the children to touch. Her pulse quickened with both fear and anticipation. She thought of Jessica's sneer, the way Michael had leaned back, triumphant, as though she had been dismissed from her own life. For years she had endured their disregard, small slights, dismissive words, choices made over her head. She had excused them, told herself they were busy with their own lives, that they didn't understand. But today, when they laughed at her, she had seen their true selves. And Richard had seen it too. Eleanor tucked the letter and the key into her purse, then carried it to the bedroom. Sliding open the top drawer of her nightstand, she placed them beneath a stack of folded scarves, hidden from any wandering eyes. That night, she barely slept. Each sound outside made her think of footsteps. Each shadow on the wall became a threat. But beneath the unease, there was something else, a flicker of resolve. Tomorrow she would go to the bank. Tomorrow she would learn what Richard had truly left her. And tomorrow her children's laughter might not echo so loudly. The morning air was cool and brittle, the kind that cut through thin fabric and made Eleanor pull her wool coat tighter. She drove herself to the bank on Ashland Avenue, a modest brick building with tall glass doors, her heart pounding so loudly she could feel it in her throat. The brass key in her purse clinked with each step she took, like a secret whisper reminding her of what was at stake. She approached the teller's desk, a young woman with careful eyes and a practiced smile. "I need to access a safe deposit box," Eleanor said, keeping her voice low. The woman nodded. "Of course. May I see the key and your identification?" Eleanor produced both. The woman examined them, then checked something on her computer. "Follow me, Mrs. Wilson." She led Eleanor into a small private room lined with metal boxes. "One moment," she said softly, disappearing to retrieve the box that matched Eleanor's key. Eleanor sat in silence, her hands clasped until the young woman returned carrying a long, narrow metal container. She placed it on the table, nodded politely, and left Eleanor alone with it. Her fingers hovered above the lid. She thought of Richard, his quiet strength, his meticulous planning, his last words to her. "Trust me." With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, There was no jewelry or stack of dollar bills, as she had half expected. Instead, there were neat folders bound with twine and a thick leather journal. Her pulse quickened. On top of the files lay a sealed envelope marked in Richard's handwriting, "For Eleanor's eyes only." She tore it open, hands trembling. "My dearest, what you see here are the records of my real estate holdings, investment accounts, and business shares. These assets are not included in the official will. They are hidden in trusts and accounts known only to me and Thomas Reynolds. Their value is greater than the $12 million given to the children. Much greater. I leave all of this to you because I know only you will protect it. And only you will know how to honor what we built together." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling. Greater than 12 million. Her children had strutted out of that reading like conquerors, but they had been handed scraps. The journal drew her attention next. She opened it carefully. Richard's handwriting filled the pages. Entries from the past year, sometimes weary, sometimes fierce. He wrote of his disappointment in their children, their greed, their disregard, their cruelty even toward each other. He wrote of his love for her, of his fear that after his death she would be alone against them. "This is why I chose this path," he had written, "not to punish them, but to reveal them and to give you the power to decide what comes next." The words blurred as tears slid down her cheeks. She felt a strange mixture of grief, relief, and something sharper, something she hadn't felt in years. Power. She gathered the files and the journal, sliding them back into the box. As she lifted it into her arms, one thought burned bright in her mind. Her children believed they had won, but they had no idea what their father had truly left behind. When Eleanor returned from the bank, the weight of the box pressed against her arms, as though it carried not only Richard's fortune, but the burden of truth itself. She had hidden the files and journal inside her bedroom closet, beneath blankets in a trunk no one had touched for years. She told herself it would be safe there, but a seed of fear had already taken root in her, fear of her own children. That evening, the front door slammed open without a warning knock. Michael barged in first, tossing his keys on the counter, his voice booming through the hallway. "Mom, where are you?" Jessica trailed behind, her laughter sharp and brittle. They were flushed with excitement, as if drunk on their sudden wealth. "Mom," Jessica called, sweeping into the living room with a grin too wide. "You should have seen the dealership today. 2 brand new cars gleaming in the sun. Dad really knew how to take care of us." Her words cut, deliberate and cruel. Eleanor forced a polite smile. "I'm glad you're happy." "Happy?" Michael echoed, striding in with his phone held up, showing off a picture of himself leaning against a luxury car. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. You should think about selling this old place. Mom, move somewhere smaller. You don't need all this space alone." Eleanor felt the sting beneath his casual tone. Smaller meant forgotten. Smaller meant tucked away, out of their way. She folded her hands in her lap, willing her voice to stay steady. "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere." Jessica tilted her head, studying Eleanor with narrowed eyes. "You seem different," she said slowly. "Not as broken as I expected. Did Dad leave you something after all?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. Eleanor's heart thudded, but she kept her expression neutral. "He left me memories," she said softly. "That's enough." Jessica smirked, but her gaze sharpened, suspicious. "Well, we're taking you out to dinner next week, to celebrate. Dad would have wanted you to join in our happiness." The pause was subtle but cutting. Eleanor merely nodded, wanting them gone. Later, as she carried dishes into the kitchen, she heard the faint creak of her bedroom door upstairs. Her pulse spiked. Quietly, she climbed the staircase. The sight that met her froze her in place. Jessica crouched beside her dresser, rifling through drawers. "What are you doing?" Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. Jessica jumped, spinning around. "I was just looking for a photo album," she stammered, though her cheeks burned with guilt. "That's my private room," Eleanor said, steel slipping into her tone. "You will not search it again?" Jessica's eyes flickered with something sharp resentment. perhaps even hatred, but she brushed past Eleanor without another word, her perfume lingering like a toxic cloud. That night, as the house settled into silence, Eleanor sat awake in bed, clutching Richard's journal to her chest. Her children no longer saw her as a grieving widow. They sensed something they couldn't name, something that frightened them. They were right to be afraid, because for the first time in her life, Eleanor wasn't going to bend to them. She thought of the safe deposit box, of Richard's words, "Give yourself the power." She had been strong once, had built a life, raised children, stood beside a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that strength. But now, with Richard's last gift clenched in her hands, she was remembering. Her children had laughed at her today. They had dismissed her, invaded her privacy, suggested she diminish herself for their convenience. They thought her weak, malleable. Eleanor opened the journal to a page Richard had marked specially. They must learn that strength is not in what you take, but in what you protect. He had written, "Show them who you truly are, my love." She closed the journal and looked out at the moon-washed garden. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would begin to show them. It was Jessica's idea to host a family dinner. She insisted it was to honor their father's memory. But Eleanor knew better. The invitation was laced with arrogance. Her daughter's voice smug as she said, "Wear something nice, Mom. You'll want to see how well we're doing." Eleanor arrived precisely on time, parking her 10-year-old sedan between Michael's new Audi and Jessica's gleaming Lexus. The contrast wasn't lost on her, a visual reminder of what her children believed was the new order of things. Jessica's dining room glittered with new furniture, a mahogany table that must have cost thousands, silver candlesticks, crystal glasses, and expensive china that had clearly never been touched before. Michael lounged at the head of the table, Richard's place a glass of wine already half empty in his hand, while Jessica flitted about, her smile stretched thin. When Eleanor sat down, the conversation immediately turned to their recent purchases. 2 cars weren't enough, Michael boasted, swirling his wine. "I put a down payment on a boat yesterday. Dad's money should be enjoyed, not locked away." Jessica laughed, her diamond earrings catching the light. "I'm looking at a vacation home in Florida. You should come visit, Mom, though I'm not sure you'd enjoy all the upkeep. Too much responsibility." Their words dripped with mockery. Eleanor forced herself to take a bite of salmon, though it tasted like ash in her mouth. She noticed how they kept glancing at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Then Michael leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mom," he said, his voice casual but edged with steel. "Did Dad really leave you only that letter?" "Nothing else." The table fell silent. Jessica's gaze sharpened, waiting. Eleanor set her fork down carefully, feeling the heat of their suspicion press against her. For years she had lowered her eyes, avoided conflict, let them steamroll her. But Richard's journal sat hidden in her trunk, his words burning in her mind. "Give yourself the power. Decide what comes next." She lifted her chin. "Yes, he left me a letter, and it was worth more than any car or boat or vacation house you could buy." Jessica's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, really? And what did this precious letter say? That's between your father and me." Eleanor replied, her voice calm, steady. Michael's jaw tightened. He slammed his wine glass down so hard the stem cracked. "Don't play games with us. If Dad left you something, we deserve to know. We're his children, too." Eleanor looked at him, at both of them, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small under their glare. She felt resolute. "You may be his children," she said quietly, "but you were never his legacy." The air shifted, heavy with tension. Jessica's eyes flashed, but she bit her tongue. Michael muttered something under his breath, leaning back with a scowl. Dinner ended soon after, the food barely touched. Eleanor drove home under a moonless sky, her heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with certainty. They would come for her. She knew it. Their greed wouldn't allow them to rest, but she wasn't the same woman they thought they could laugh at. Not anymore. The knowledge sat in her chest like a burning coal. Let them come. She was ready. The storm came the next evening, not with rain or thunder, but with pounding fists against Eleanor's front door. She had been expecting it, had spent the day in quiet preparation, moving Richard's documents to safer hiding places, memorizing account numbers, and steeling herself for confrontation. When she opened the door, Michael stood there, his face flushed, his jaw tight. Behind him, Jessica lingered, arms crossed, her eyes sharp as blades. "Enough games, Mom," Michael snapped, pushing past her into the house. "We know Dad left you more than just that letter." Eleanor steadied herself against the doorframe, watching them invade her space with the confidence of those who believed they had every right. "You should leave," she said calmly. "This isn't a good time." "We're not leaving until you tell us the truth," Jessica hissed, stepping closer. "Do you think you can sit there smug while we're left wondering what you're hiding? We're his blood. If there's more money, it belongs to us." Her words cut deep, not because of their meaning, but because of their emptiness. They spoke of entitlement, not love. Eleanor thought of the nights she had stayed awake nursing their fevers, the meals she had scraped together when money was tight, the endless sacrifices. None of it mattered to them now. "I don't owe you an explanation," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but firm. Michael slammed a fist on the hallway table, making the framed family photos jump. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. We could make arrangements for you. A care facility, perhaps. Somewhere you won't have to worry about all these responsibilities." The threat hung heavy in the air. They weren't offering care. They were offering exile. Eleanor forced a calm breath, meeting their eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Jessica sneered, grabbed her purse, and stormed out. Michael lingered a beat longer, his gaze searching Eleanor's face for cracks before following his sister into the night. The door slammed shut behind them, rattling the frame. Eleanor's hands shook as she locked it, then double-checked the deadbolt. She knew then they would not stop. Their greed had become hunger, insatiable and dangerous. The next morning, Eleanor drove to Thomas Reynolds' office. His secretary ushered her into a paneled room where he sat behind a heavy oak desk, glasses perched low on his nose. "They know," Eleanor whispered as soon as the door closed. "Or at least they suspect. They threatened me last night." Reynolds leaned back, folding his hands. "Richard prepared for this. The trusts are sealed. The assets are untouchable without your consent. Legally, you are safe." "Legally," Eleanor echoed, the word bitter on her tongue. "But what about otherwise? You didn't see the way they looked at me." He studied her for a long moment. "You will need to be cautious. Do not let them know what you hold. And above all, do not underestimate them. Desperation makes people reckless." Eleanor nodded, clutching Richard's journal inside her bag like a shield. As she left his office, the autumn wind caught at her coat, cold against her skin. She knew now that this wasn't only about inheritance, it was about survival. And if her children thought she would surrender, they had forgotten who raised them. Eleanor should have expected it, but the sight still hollowed her out. It was late afternoon when she returned from the market, bags of groceries digging into her arms. The front door stood ajar, a chill rippling through her as she stepped inside. The silence was louder than any noise. Upstairs, drawers yawned open. Her jewelry box lay tipped over, necklaces spilling like broken promises across the carpet. Her closet door hung wide, blankets tossed aside, the old trunk shoved out from its corner. The lock had been forced, splintered wood marking their impatience. They had been here, her children, ransacking her home like thieves. Eleanor sank to her knees beside the trunk, rifling through the mess with shaking hands. The journal was gone, the files too. For a moment, panic stole the air from her lungs. Then her eyes caught the faint outline of the false bottom Henry had built years ago. A hidden compartment, invisible unless you knew where to press. She lifted it. There, safe and untouched, lay the real folders and the real journal. They had found decoys, an empty binder, and old notebooks she had placed there herself days ago. Half by instinct, half by fear, a ragged laugh escaped her. They thought they had won. That night, Eleanor sat in the darkened living room, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp outside. Her children no longer saw her as their mother. To them, she was an obstacle, and obstacles were meant to be removed. But Richard's words pulsed through her. Give yourself the power. Decide what comes next. For years, she had lived quietly, trying not to provoke, trying not to see the cruelty that had taken root in the people she had raised. She told herself patience was strength, forgiveness was duty. But forgiveness had only sharpened their hunger. If they wanted a game, then she would play not with fists or threats, but with something stronger: patience, cunning, and truth. The knock on her door came just after dusk, soft and hesitant, nothing like the pounding fists of its parents. When Eleanor opened it, her grandson stood there tall, awkward in his growing frame, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. Jason was 17, Michael's son, with the same strong jaw but softer eyes. Those eyes, though, were wide with worry now. "Grandma," he whispered. "Can I come in?" Eleanor stepped aside without a word. He walked into the living room and sank into the couch, shoulders hunched as though carrying a weight far too heavy for him. "They're fighting again," he said finally. "Mom and Dad, about you, about money. It's all they ever talk about now." His voice cracked. "I hate it." Eleanor sat beside him, the distance between them closing in an instant. He was still just a boy, though the world was already trying to harden him. "They think you're hiding something," he continued, glancing at her with eyes both fearful and hopeful. "Are you—" The question pierced her, not with suspicion, but with a kind of plea. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking for truth. Eleanor reached for Richard's journal, which she had taken to carrying with her. Slowly, she opened to a page marked by her husband's steady hand. She placed it in Jason's lap. "They must learn that love is the only wealth that endures," Richard had written. "If they cannot, then they will lose everything. But if even one soul remains uncorrupted, then our legacy is safe." Jason read in silence, his lips moving slightly over each word. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "He meant me, didn't he?" Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "He meant anyone who still understood what mattered. I believe that's you." For the first time since Richard's death, a spark of warmth flickered inside her. Here, in this boy who had grown up surrounded by greed, yet still carried kindness in his heart, was hope. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They've been searching your room. Dad thinks you have papers. Mom told him that if they find proof, they'll take you to court." "I know," Eleanor whispered. "Then you need help," he said. "You can't fight them alone." Eleanor studied his face, so young, so earnest, yet already bearing scars from being raised by wolves. He wasn't wrong. Alone, she was vulnerable. But with him, she wasn't just defending herself. She was building something Richard would have been proud of. She closed the journal, resting her hand over his. "Then we'll fight together." His fingers tightened around hers, and in that grip, Eleanor felt something she hadn't known in weeks: strength. The game her children thought they were winning had just changed, because now she had an ally. They worked in silence at first, Eleanor and Jason, the dining table littered with folders, envelopes, and the faint smell of old paper. He handled each document carefully, his long fingers tracing lines of text he barely understood. Eleanor explained what she could trust: accounts, deeds, but more than anything, she watched the way he listened, the seriousness in his young face. "Why did Grandpa hide all this?" he asked softly, lifting a paper that bore his father's name crossed out, replaced by Eleanor's. "Because he knew what your parents would become," she said, her voice catching. "He wanted me to have the choice to protect what mattered." Jason looked down, his jaw tightening. "They don't care about family. They only care about money." Eleanor reached across the table, touched his hand. And you? His eyes lifted to hers, steady and clear. I care about you. For a moment, the ache in Eleanor's chest softened. Richard had left her alone, but not entirely. That night, after Jason left, Eleanor carried the most important documents into her bedroom. She slipped them into a locked case she'd bought years ago but never used. Then, with trembling fingers, she transferred what funds she could into an account in her name alone. It wasn't everything, no. That would draw suspicion, but it was enough to keep her safe. The next morning, she made tea and sat in the kitchen when Jessica stopped by unannounced. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she entered, her smile all teeth. Morning, Mother. You look tired. Are you eating well? Her words dripped with false concern. She glanced at the table, scanning for anything she could seize upon. Eleanor had left only a crossword puzzle in yesterday's newspaper. I'm managing, Eleanor said lightly, lifting her cup. Though I can't seem to finish this puzzle. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Still reading Dad's letter? Eleanor feigned confusion. Oh, that old thing, I tucked it away. It was just sentimental nonsense. The lie slid easily off her tongue. Jessica relaxed, but not fully. Something restless churned behind her eyes. When she left, Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. They believed what they wanted to believe, that she was weak, fading, distracted. They laughed louder each time she played the part, but at night, with Jason by her side, she sorted documents, cross-checked accounts, and began to build walls they could never scale. The more they gloated, the less they saw the truth. Richard's words echoed through her. Give yourself the power. Decide what comes next, for the first time. Eleanor felt the stirrings of something fierce, something dangerously close to satisfaction, because she knew now she wasn't just surviving, she was preparing. And when the time came, their laughter would be the last sound before silence. It was Jason who told her first, a week later. He came late in the evening, his hoodie damp from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't even sit down before blurting it out. They're planning something. Grandma, he said, his voice urgent. I heard them talking in the kitchen after dinner. They think you're hiding money. They're saying you're unfit to manage anything, that they could take you to court, get control of everything. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table, the words slamming into her like cold water. Unfit, she repeated, tasting the bitterness of it. He nodded, his jaw tight. Dad said you're too old, too fragile. Mom said you might be... He stopped, his eyes flicking away. She said what? Jason? She said you might be losing your mind. The silence that followed was unbearable. The children she had raised, whose scraped knees she had bandaged, whose nightmares she had soothed, now painted her as a burden, an obstacle. They weren't satisfied with millions. They wanted the rest, too. Eleanor drew a deep breath, forcing calm into her voice. And what did you do? I recorded them. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then played the muffled audio. Their voices spilled into the room, sharp, confident, dripping with contempt. She doesn't know what she's doing. Jessica's voice rang out. If we take it to court, the judge will see she's incompetent. Michael's laugh followed. We'll get everything she's hiding. Trust me, by the time we're finished, she'll be sitting in a home and we'll be sitting on her fortune. Jason stopped the recording. His hands shook slightly. They're serious. Grandma, you need to be ready. Eleanor reached across the table, took his hand in hers. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. You've done the right thing. Thank you. That night, she sat alone long after he'd gone. Richard's journal opened before her. Her husband had seen this coming. His words, written months before his death, stared up at her. If they cannot love, they will try to devour. Protect yourself. Protect what matters. Eleanor thought of the courtroom, of their smirks as they painted her as senile, broken. The image burned. No. If they wanted war, she would not face it trembling. The next morning, she returned to Thomas Reynolds. His lined face hardened as she relayed what she had heard. "It's worse than I feared," he murmured. "But Richard prepared for this. There is something you haven't yet seen, a safeguard." From his desk, he pulled a sealed envelope. Richard's handwriting scrolled across the front, "For my wife. If the children turn against her." Eleanor's breath caught. Her hands shook as she reached for it. "Open it," Reynolds said quietly. "It may be the key to ending this." The envelope trembled in her hands as though it held not paper, but the weight of her entire future. Reynolds leaned back, giving her space, his gaze steady. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My love, if you are reading this, then the children have turned against you. I feared it might come to this. I could not change their hearts, but I could ensure they reap what they sow. Their inheritance was never free. Attached to their 12 million are debts, taxes, and liabilities that will surface only if they attempt to take what is yours. Should they push you into court, they will unleash a storm they cannot control, and when the dust settles, they will have nothing." Eleanor's breath caught, the words blurring as she read them again and again. Richard had crafted not only a gift, but a trap, a net woven so tightly that greed itself would be the blade to cut them down. Reynolds slid another folder across the desk. "These are the documents," he explained. "Legal filings, tax records, loan agreements your husband concealed within the trusts. If the children stay satisfied with what they have, these will never come to light. But the moment they challenge you," he tapped the folder, "they inherit ruin." Eleanor stared at the papers, her pulse hammering. Part of her recoiled at the thought destroying her own children, watching them fall from luxury into dust. But then she remembered the recording, their voices dripping with disdain as they plotted to cast her aside like refuse. She remembered Jessica rifling through her drawers, Michael slamming his fist on her table. They had chosen this path. She lifted her eyes to Reynolds. "If it comes to that, will you stand with me?" His expression softened. "I made your husband a promise, and now I make it to you." Yes. When Eleanor returned home, the house felt colder than ever, though the sun streamed through the windows. She sat at the kitchen table with the envelope open before her, Richard's words burning into her like fire. For years she had lived in fear of disappointing her children, of losing their affection, of being alone. But now she understood the truth. She had already lost them. What remained was a test, not of motherhood, but of strength. She placed the papers into her locked case, tucking the key into her pocket. Her hands no longer shook. They thought her fragile, defenseless. But they had forgotten where they came from. They had forgotten the woman who had built this family alongside Richard, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. "If it's war they want," she whispered into the stillness, her voice firm, "then war they will have." And for the first time, she almost wished they would try. For days, Eleanor moved carefully, every step calculated. She cooked simple meals, left the blinds half drawn, and let her children believe she was drifting further into frailty. They visited often now, not out of love, but to watch, to circle, to wait for weakness. She decided to give them exactly what they wanted, a taste of hope. It happened one afternoon over tea. Jessica had dropped by, her heels tapping across the tile like gunshots. She sat at the table, scrolling her phone, pretending to be bored. "I found an old box in the attic," Eleanor said casually, stirring sugar into her cup. "Your father must have forgotten about it. I haven't had the strength to open it yet." Jessica's head snapped up. Her eyes sharpened with hunger before she quickly masked it with a smile. "A box? What kind of box?" "Oh, just something he tucked away," Eleanor replied, feigning indifference. "Papers, maybe. Who knows? Perhaps nothing at all." She let the silence stretch, then changed the subject. But she saw the way Jessica's fingers tightened around her phone, the way her gaze flicked toward the ceiling, toward the attic access panel in the hallway. The bait was set. That evening, Michael arrived unannounced. His tone was overly casual, his words rehearsed. "Mom, if you find anything else of Dad's, you really should let us handle it. You don't want to get overwhelmed with complicated paperwork." Eleanor smiled faintly, masking the fire inside her. Of course, dear. If it's important, I'll be sure to tell you. They left soon after, whispering together on the porch, their silhouettes sharp against the porch light. They thought they were clever. They thought they were closing in. Later, Eleanor sat with Jason in the quiet of the living room. He had listened to her story, his face grave. You really told them about a box? He asked. Yes, Eleanor said, smoothing Richard's journal on her lap. And now they'll claw at each other trying to get to it. But the real box, the one that matters, they'll never find because it's not in the attic. His brow furrowed. Then where? Eleanor smiled, tucking a strand of gray hair behind her ear. Where only Richard and I knew, and where only Reynolds and I can reach. He nodded slowly, understanding. Then, after a pause, Grandma, when the time comes, will you really destroy them? The question hung heavy between them. Eleanor thought of her children as infants, cradled in her arms. She thought of scraped knees, birthdays, laughter that once had been pure. And then she thought of their sneers, their threats, their plan to lock her away. They destroyed themselves, she said at last. I'll only show them the truth. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, thick with silence. The trap was set. All that remained was for them to step into it. The storm broke on a Sunday afternoon. Eleanor was in the kitchen peeling apples for a pie when the front door slammed open. Michael strode in first, his shoulders tight with fury, Jessica at his heels like a shadow. Their faces were hard, their eyes gleaming with the same hunger she had seen in wolves. Where is it? Michael barked. Eleanor set down the knife, wiping her hands on a towel with deliberate calm. Where is what the box? Jessica snapped, her voice shrill. Don't play dumb, Mother. You said you found something in the attic. We want it now. Eleanor tilted her head as though confused. Oh, that old thing. I haven't even opened it yet. It's probably nothing but papers. Stop lying. Michael's fist crashed against the table, making the apples jump. You think you can hoard what Dad left behind? You're not fit to handle any of this. We'll take it to court if we have to. Their rage pressed against Eleanor like heat, but she refused to flinch. Instead, she folded the towel slowly, laid it on the counter, and met their eyes. If you believe that's best, she said evenly, then yes, we'll let a judge decide. They froze, caught off guard by her calm. Jessica blinked, then smirked. Fine, we'll see you in court, and when the judge hears how frail and confused you've become, it'll all come to us. Her words struck deep, but Eleanor did not let it show. She only nodded, as if conceding. If that's what you want. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by their shallow, angry breaths. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw doubt flicker in Michael's eyes, but it was quickly buried beneath arrogance. Pack your things, Mother, he sneered. By the time this is over, you won't be needing this house. They stormed out as abruptly as they had come, the slam of the door rattling the windows. Eleanor sank into a chair, her hands trembling, the apple knife still glinting on the counter. The house was quiet again, but her pulse thundered in her ears. They had declared war, and they thought they had already won. Eleanor reached for Richard's journal, tucked safely in the cabinet. Her husband's words steadied her. Their arrogance will be their undoing. Trust in truth. A strange calm settled over her. The children believed they were driving her into a corner, but they were walking straight into Richard's snare. Court would not strip her of power. It would strip them. As the late sun slanted through the window, catching the dust in golden beams, Eleanor whispered aloud as if Richard might still hear her. Let them come. And for the first time, she almost smiled. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, its tall ceilings echoing every shuffle and cough. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table beside Thomas Reynolds, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Michael and Jessica leaned toward each other, whispering with smug smiles. Their attorneys, sleek and confident in pressed suits, shuffled papers, not even glancing her way. They hadn't even looked at her when they entered, as if she were already gone. Jason sat directly behind Eleanor, his presence a silent support. He had insisted on coming, despite his parents' fury. "I need to be there," he had told Eleanor the night before. "For you," the judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, called the room to order. Jessica's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, my clients are here because their mother, a woman in declining health, has been concealing assets left by her late husband. We believe she is no longer capable of managing her affairs and request guardianship be transferred to her children." Michael and Jessica nodded solemnly, masks of concern painted across their faces. Jessica even dabbed at an imaginary tear. Reynolds remained still, calm, waiting. When it was their turn, he rose slowly, his voice measured. "Your Honor, my client may be elderly, but she is neither incompetent nor deceitful. What we have here is not a question of her capacity, but of greed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Michael stiffened, his jaw clenching. Reynolds placed a thick folder on the judge's bench. Before his passing, Richard Wilson prepared extensive documentation. These records reveal that the assets granted to the children in his will were not without burden. Attached to their $12 million are hidden debts, unpaid taxes, and penalties. Should they attempt to seize more, these liabilities are activated. The judge flipped through the papers, her eyes narrowing as she read. "Are you suggesting," she asked slowly, "that the children's inheritance is conditional?" "Yes, Your Honor," Reynolds replied. "Conditional and binding. If they had accepted what was given to them, these debts would have remained dormant. By bringing this matter to court, they have triggered the very clauses their father designed." Jessica's face blanched. Michael half rose from his seat. "That's impossible," he barked. "You're lying." "Order," the judge snapped, slamming her gavel. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. "I assure you, Your Honor, the signatures, the trusts, and the filings are all legal and valid. Their father anticipated this very scenario." The courtroom hummed with whispers. Michael and Jessica's lawyers frantically flipped through the documents, their confident expressions draining away with every page. Eleanor sat still, her heart hammering, but her face serene. Richard had laid the trap years ago, and now it had sprung shut. The judge closed the folder with a decisive thud. "The court sees no evidence of incompetence. Petition denied. Furthermore, I advise the petitioners to consult financial counsel immediately. This matter has awakened obligations that appear considerable." Michael and Jessica sat frozen, as pale as marble statues. Their lawyer leaned over, whispering frantically, but they seemed unable to process his words. Eleanor rose slowly, leaning on the table, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, steady smile. Let them laugh now, she thought, because their laughter had just cost them everything. It began slowly, like the first cracks in glass, a frozen account here, a notice in the mail there. But soon the cracks spread, running jagged lines across the glittering facade her children had built. Michael was the first to feel it. His new boat, barely a month old, was repossessed at the marina. He stormed into Eleanor's driveway the next morning, red-faced, spitting fury. "This is your doing," he shouted, pounding on the hood of his car. "You ruined me." Eleanor stood at the window, silent, the curtains drawn just enough to watch. He looked smaller without the arrogance, his bluster deflating when no one answered the door. Eventually, he drove off, tires screeching, but even that sounded desperate rather than powerful. Jessica's unraveling came more quietly. Creditors began calling her office, her Florida vacation home, bought in haste and pride, slipped into foreclosure before she had even furnished it. One afternoon, Eleanor saw her sitting in her car outside the house, her face buried in her hands. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor almost went to her, almost. But Richard's words in his journal returned to her. They must reap what they sow. The whispers spread through town quickly. The proud heirs of Richard Wilson were drowning in debt, their shiny toys stripped away, their names whispered with pity and scorn. Their laughter at the will reading had curdled into bitter silence. Meanwhile, Eleanor walked to the market with her head high. Neighbors who once pitied her now nodded with respect, though none knew the full truth. Only Reynolds, Jason, and Eleanor understood the scope of Richard's design. At night, Jason helped her transfer more assets quietly, carefully into secure accounts, some in her name, some in his for the future. They worked like architects, rebuilding from ruins, their bond deepening with each late hour spent over papers and signatures. "They're tearing each other apart," he told her one evening, a faint note of awe in his voice. "Mom blames Dad. Dad blames Mom. They barely speak now." "Good," Eleanor murmured, her pen scratching across the page. Greed eats itself in the end. Yet even as satisfaction swelled, there was sorrow, too. These were her children, her babies. Once she had rocked them to sleep, held their hands on their first day of school, kissed away scraped knees. And now, watching them sink, she felt the ache of a mother's heart alongside the triumph of a wronged woman. But Richard had given her more than wealth. He had given her the power to choose, and she knew now that her choice was not to save them, but to show them the truth of who they had become. The storm had broken. Their empire was gone, and Eleanor was still standing. Reynolds insisted the meeting take place in his office. Neutral ground, he called it, a place where the walls could contain what was bound to break loose. Michael and Jessica arrived first, their faces drawn tight, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and endless phone calls from creditors. The arrogance was gone. In its place was desperation, a brittle edge of fear. They barely acknowledged each other, sitting on opposite sides of the room as though even proximity burned. Eleanor entered last, Jason walking quietly beside her. His presence was a steadying force, a reminder that not all bonds had rotted. Reynolds rose, greeting them with his usual formality, before laying a thick folder on the table. "Thank you for coming," he began. "We are here to put to rest any remaining disputes concerning Richard Wilson's estate." Jessica leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Disputes? You mean the lies she's hiding money? She's been hiding it from us since the beginning." Her words lashed out, but they rang hollow now, more a plea than an accusation. Michael rubbed his temples, muttering, "We wouldn't be in this mess if you just told us the truth, Mother." Eleanor looked at them, her children, reduced to ruin by their own greed, and felt the ache of grief and anger entwined. Then she stood, her voice steady, each word deliberate. "You think I've hidden something from you," she said. "And you are right, but it was not mine to share. It was your father's final choice." Their heads snapped up. Eleanor opened the folder Reynolds had prepared. Inside lay Richard's journal, pages marked and underlined alongside the legal documents they had triggered with their lawsuit. "Your father saw who you had become," she continued. "He gave you wealth and you squandered it. He gave you comfort and you demanded more. So he left me the real legacy, not to punish you, but to protect what mattered. And he tied your fortune to your greed, knowing it would be your undoing." Jessica's face crumpled, tears streaking her cheeks. "That's not fair," she whispered. "We're his children." "Yes," Eleanor said softly, though her voice carried like steel. "But you were never his legacy. You traded love for money, family for pride, and now you have nothing left." Silence swallowed the room. Michael stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists, trembling not with rage, but with something closer to despair. Eleanor turned then to Jason, laying a hand on his shoulder. "This is who will carry his name forward. Not you." The words landed like a gavel. Final. Irrevocable. Reynolds closed the folder with a snap. "The estate is settled. There will be no further contest." Eleanor looked once more at her children, their eyes hollow, their pride broken, and felt the sharp, aching sting of both victory and loss. The reckoning was complete. The house was unbearably quiet. For weeks, Eleanor's days had been filled with battles. Sharp words, slammed doors, late-night whispers of strategy with Reynolds and Jason. And then, suddenly, silence. The court hearings were over, the papers signed, the judgments final. Her children had vanished, leaving only the echo of their footsteps and the faint smell of their expensive perfumes and colognes clinging to memory. She should have felt triumphant. She had won. The law had shielded her. Richard's careful foresight had sprung its trap, and her children were stripped of everything they had flaunted. Their cars, their houses, their boasts, all gone. But victory carried no laughter. It was heavy, solemn, almost mournful. Eleanor moved through the house slowly, touching the walls as though they might crumble without Richard here. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than ever, each second a reminder that time moves forward, even when your heart feels pinned to the past. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by their faces in the courtroom, the hollow eyes, the anger collapsing into despair. Once she would have done anything to spare them pain. Now she was the instrument of it. Her mind repeated the same question over and over. What kind of mother destroys her own children but another voice? Richard's rose from the pages of his journal that she kept on the nightstand. Not destruction. He had written truth. They destroyed themselves with greed. You only revealed it. And yet the ache remained. A mother's heart never stops being a mother's heart, even when it is bruised, even when it is betrayed. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, Eleanor sat on the porch with a blanket over her knees. Jason joined her, his presence quiet but steady. They watched the light fade, the world softening into twilight. "You're too quiet lately," he said gently. "I've been listening to the silence," she replied. "It has a way of asking questions." He frowned. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor turned to look at him, his young face earnest and searching. "I regret that it came to this," she said softly. "I regret that greed stole the children I once knew. But no, I do not regret standing my ground. Sometimes love must be firm. Sometimes it must even be cruel." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. Then he reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, strong, alive. In that small gesture, Eleanor felt something shift. The silence was still there. Yes, but it was no longer empty. It was waiting for what she did not yet know. But for the first time since the storm broke, she felt that the quiet might hold not only grief, but the seed of something new. The first morning she woke without dread. The house smelled of cinnamon. She had baked again for the first time in years. Just a simple loaf, the kind Richard used to love with his coffee. Jason wandered in, his hair a mess, his eyes sleepy. He sniffed the air and grinned. "Grandma, you cooked," he said, almost in disbelief. "I baked," she corrected, sliding the warm loaf onto the counter. "Cooking is survival. Baking is hope." He laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen like sunlight. Days began to take on rhythm. They worked together on the house, mending the porch railings, painting the shutters, clearing the garden that had grown wild during those months of chaos. He hammered nails with more strength than accuracy, but Eleanor didn't mind the bent ones. Each strike echoed with new beginnings. At night, they sat at the dining table, not with legal documents, but with books and puzzles. He teased her for squinting at crosswords. She teased him for pretending to understand the novels he picked. The house, once heavy with silence, began to hum with small, ordinary joys. Money was no longer a looming shadow. With Reynolds' guidance, Eleanor had secured Richard's assets, placed funds into safe accounts, and begun a modest trust for Jason. It wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about knowing they would never again be at the mercy of greed. One evening, as they painted the living room walls a warm cream, Jason asked quietly, "Do you ever think they'll come back, Mom and Dad?" The brush in Eleanor's hand paused. She had thought of it often, of her children showing up at the door, not with fury this time, but with shame. Part of her longed for it. Another part recoiled. "They might," she said finally. "But if they do, it won't be for love. It will be for what they lost." He looked at her, his brow furrowed. And what will you do? Eleanor set the brush down, wiped her hands on an old rag. I'll give them what I can spare. A meal, perhaps. A roof for a night. But never again my trust. That part of me they threw away. He nodded slowly, as though carving the lesson into his bones. Then I'll remember that, too. Later that night, they sat by the fireplace, the flames dancing low. Eleanor watched Jason doze off in the chair beside her, his face softened in sleep. She thought of Richard's journal, of the line that had haunted her most, "If even one soul remains uncorrupted, then our legacy is safe." She reached for her grandson's hand, resting it gently in hers. "Yes, Richard," she whispered into the crackle of the fire. "One soul remains, and with him I will build again." It was nearly midnight when the knock came, soft at first, then sharper, more frantic. Jason stirred on the couch, blinking in confusion. Eleanor motioned for him to stay put and went to the door. On the porch stood Jessica. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked nothing like the woman who had once draped herself in jewels and silk, laughing at Eleanor from behind her glass of wine. She looked broken. "Mother," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please let me in." Eleanor stepped aside. Jessica entered hesitantly, glancing around the house as though ashamed to be seen there. She sat at the table, her hands shaking. "They took everything," she said, staring at the wood grain. "The cars, the house, even the furniture. I've been sleeping in motels, eating from vending machines. I didn't know where else to go." Her words cut through Eleanor, not because of pity alone, but because beneath the ruin, she still saw the girl she had once been, the child who had clung to her hand on her first day of school, who had whispered secrets into her ear at night. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "You had somewhere to go," she said quietly. "You always had me, but you chose money instead." Jessica flinched as though struck. "I know," she choked. "I was wrong. I was blind. Please, Mother, just help me." Jason appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide, his shoulders tense. He looked to Eleanor. Waiting. Eleanor rose, went to the stove, and ladled soup into a bowl. She placed it in front of Jessica along with a slice of the cinnamon bread. Jessica stared at it as though it were a feast. Slowly, with trembling hands, she ate. When she finished, Eleanor set a blanket on the couch. "You can sleep here tonight," she said. "You'll be safe." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "That's all." Eleanor met her gaze, steady but not cruel. "That's what I can give, food, shelter, but not trust. That you spent long ago." Jessica's lips trembled, but she nodded. She lay down on the couch, curling beneath the blanket, her sobs muffled against the cushions. Eleanor returned to her room, Jason following. "Why didn't you give her more?" he whispered. "Because mercy and forgiveness are not the same," Eleanor said softly. "Mercy is food, a roof, a place to rest. Forgiveness must be earned, and she has not earned it." He was silent for a long moment, then whispered, "I think I understand." As Eleanor closed the door, she felt the weight of the night pressing in. Jessica was under her roof again, but not in her heart. Some bridges can carry weight even after burning. Others are nothing but ash. The morning after Jessica's arrival, the house felt uneasy, as if the walls themselves held their breath. She left before dawn. The blanket folded neatly on the couch, the bowl rinsed in the sink. No note, no goodbye, only silence. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a pen in her hand and Richard's journal opened beside her. Jason lingered nearby, watching quietly, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Are you rewriting it?" he asked softly. "Yes," Eleanor said, her pen poised above the page. "It's time." For weeks, she had avoided the task, as though leaving things unwritten might delay the inevitable. But Richard had entrusted her with more than wealth. He had entrusted her with the duty to shape what came next. She called Reynolds later that morning. By noon, he arrived with a fresh will drafted, the papers crisp, the ink ready. Together, they sat in the living room, sunlight spilling across the table as Eleanor read through every line. To her children, she left only photographs, memories they could not twist into money, mementos of what they had once been before greed hollowed them out. To Jason, she left everything else: the house, the trusts, the shares, the legacy Richard had hidden so carefully, now secured for a soul still uncorrupted. When the pen touched paper, her hand no longer trembled. She signed with clarity, sealing the future not with anger, but with purpose. Reynolds nodded, his expression unreadable, but respectful. "You've done what Richard hoped," he said. "You've chosen wisely." After he left, Eleanor and Jason sat by the fireplace, the new will tucked safely away. He was quiet for a long time, then finally asked, "Why me?" Eleanor turned to him, studying the boy who had stood by her when all others turned away. His face carried both youth and shadows of the man he would become. "Because you remembered love when the rest forgot," she said simply. "Because you stayed. Because your heart is the legacy your grandfather wanted to protect." His eyes glistened, and he looked away quickly, embarrassed. But Eleanor saw the weight of it settle into him, the responsibility, the honor. They spent that evening in small comforts. Eleanor baked again, the smell of bread warming the house. Jason read aloud from one of Richard's favorite books, stumbling over words, laughing when she corrected him. It was not grand or dramatic, but it was real. And as she listened to the fire crackle and his voice rise in the lamplight, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. The war was over. The wounds would scar. Yes, but scars are proof of survival. She had given away trust where it was deserved, withheld it where it was squandered, and built a legacy not of money, but of love. And in that moment, she knew Richard would have been proud. The house was quiet again, but not with the hollow silence of before. This quiet was different, gentler, fuller, the kind that comes when storms have passed and the air is washed clean. Eleanor sat on the porch in Richard's old rocking chair, the autumn wind carrying the scent of leaves and wood smoke. Jason was in the yard, raking in uneven circles, humming to himself. She watched him, her chest rising with a steady calm. She thought of the path that had brought her here, the laughter of her children at the will reading, the sting of their contempt, the shadow of their threats. She thought of the courtroom, the shock on their faces when Richard's snare closed tight. She thought of the night Jessica begged at her door, and of the moment she signed the new will, passing everything to the only one who had stood by her. And through it all, she thought of Richard. For years, she had leaned on his strength. He had been her compass, her protector, her partner. When he died, she feared she had lost not only him, but herself. Yet his last gift was not money or papers. It was faith. Faith that she could stand even alone. Faith that she could look into the eyes of betrayal and not break. Eleanor lifted his journal, worn now from her hands, and opened to the final page. His last entry, written in his careful script, read, "If you are reading this, then I am gone. But remember, my love, wealth is not measured in accounts. It is measured in courage, in truth, in the hearts we leave behind. You are stronger than you believe. Trust yourself, and know I have trusted you always." Tears blurred the words, but they did not sting as before. These were not tears of grief, but of gratitude. Jason's laughter carried from the yard, light and unburdened. He waved to her, and she waved back. In him she saw not only the future Richard had spoken of, but proof that their love had not been wasted, that even among thorns, one flower had bloomed. Eleanor closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. "My children may have lost their way," she whispered into the wind. But I have not lost mine. I have found it again in him, in myself, in the strength you left me." The rocking chair creaked as she leaned back, the sunset spilling fire across the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. They had laughed at her once, certain she was defeated. But she had endured. She had risen. And in the end, it was not their money, nor even Richard's fortune that mattered. It was the legacy of love, of truth, of resilience. And that, she knew, was something they could never take from her.